Well, good morning, C3. How you guys doing this morning? Good. Cool. Jamie's doing good. I think she might have been the only one who just said good there. Are you guys doing okay this morning? You guys doing good this morning? Good. Hey, look at that. That's great. Man, hope you guys had a very Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year. It's 2021. You guys excited that it's 2021? Yeah, okay. Not so much. We'll get there, guys. We'll get there, okay? It's also PJ Day. I don't know if you guys got that or if your kids got that, if they're down there celebrating with our kids ministry. I almost wore these for PJ Day, and then I thought, it's a little too early for that, for all of us, don't you think? So to spare you, I decided not to wear those. But yeah, man, we're excited. We're excited to kick off this new year with you guys and worship with you guys, and continue worshiping with you guys. My house this Christmas season has officially been infiltrated by a woman named Alexa. Anybody else there with me on that one? I know I'm way late to the game on this one. I know Alexa's been around for years, okay? But my sister got me an Echo Dot, Amazon Echo Dot for Christmas. It's pretty cool, I must say. It's pretty cool being able to turn on random music while you're just hanging out, or your kids want to hear a song. You don't have to, whatever. You can just say, Alexa, will you do this? Whatever, But I think the most impressive thing about Alexa is that she seems to have all the answers. Right? Like every time I ask her a question, it seems like she knows the right answer, right? So I can ask her, what's the weather like, which has been awesome. We got some snow recently, right? And she can tell me the right answer. I can ask her to shuffle songs by Coldplay and put it on volume 10, and I'll be satisfied for hours, right? Or I could even ask her to tell me a joke, and she'll respond with things like, why did the banana go to the doctor? Because it wasn't peeling well. Yeah. So I'm satisfied all the time. So I figured since Alexa knows all the answers, I figured I would ask her some of life's pressing questions right now. So I asked her, Alexa, when will COVID be gone? And she said, sorry, I don't know that one. I was like, sweet, Alexa, thanks for nothing, I asked her, Alexa, is the government going to give me $600 or $2,000? And she started rambling on, and then it wasn't the answer I wanted to hear, so I stopped listening. And then I said, Alexa, what's the meaning of life? And she said, Eleanor Roosevelt says the purpose of life is to live it, is what she said. So here's the deal. I don't know if Alexa actually has all the answers, but I do know something. We all have questions. I know that to be true, that we all have questions. And to that end, I'm excited to tell you there's a resource coming out this week from your C3 Family Ministry team. It's called Table Talk, and it's a C3 Family Ministry podcast. So you can be looking for this first episode this week. It drops this week. We're excited about this podcast. What we want to do is we want to start discussions about some of the most pressing issues you face as disciples, as parents, as kids, whatever that might be. We want to address different topics and just start discussions. We don't have all the answers like Alexa might, but we do think that we can start a conversation that's biblically based, and hopefully it can be practical, encouraging, and genuine. You can be looking for that first episode this week. It drops this week. We all have questions, but I think in our text this morning, Jesus asks the most important question that anybody could ever answer. And we'll get there. We're going to be in Luke chapter 9, so if you have your Bibles, open up to Luke chapter 9. That's where we're going to be. But before we get there, I want to catch us up because it's been a while since we've been in Luke. It's actually been 2 months since we've been in the Gospel of Luke. We had our Thanksgiving series and we had our Christmas series, so we haven't been in there for 9 or 10 weeks so far. So I want to catch us up a little bit on what's happening. I'm excited to jump back into Luke because I think it's important that we study the Gospel. But I also am excited because of what's happening in Luke chapter 9. And what's happening here. There's some pretty important things that are happening in Jesus and his life and in his ministry. We're right thick in the middle of this time of Jesus' ministry where he's in Galilee. He's been all around the region of Galilee. He's been teaching and healing and preaching all these crazy things. It's really started in chapter 4, and it goes all the way through basically to the end of chapter 9 that we're in. So we're nearing the end of it. But here's some of the stuff that happens. He calls his disciples in Galilee to follow him. He teaches in temples. He cleanses people of demons. He preaches in synagogues. He cleanses lepers. He heals a paralytic. He answers questions from the teachers of the law. He gives one of his most famous sermons. He raises a widow's son from the dead. He forgives a sinful woman who worshiped him. He taught in parables. He calmed a storm. He healed a demon-possessed man. He heals a woman with an issue of bleeding and then heals Jairus' daughter. He sends out the 12 to proclaim the kingdom of God, and he feeds the 5,000. It's been a busy time for Jesus, to say the least. while he's been in Galilee. And all throughout this whole section, there's one common theme that keeps like peeking its head out. Like it's like this one thing that keeps showing up. And it's really these questions that keep coming out about Jesus' identity. I mean, if you look through your Bible, you can look at chapter 4, Luke 4:22. This is after he teaches in his hometown. Everybody's like, hey, isn't this just Joseph's son? Like, who is this guy, right? Even you go later in that chapter in 4:36, he cleanses a man of a demon, and the crowd says, what is this word? For with authority and power he commands the unclean spirits, and they come out. Go to chapter 5, verse 21. After healing a paralytic, the scribes and the Pharisees questioned among themselves. They said, who is this who speaks blasphemies? Only God can forgive sins, right? And then if you skip to chapter 7, after he raises this widow's son, the crowd is seized with fear, and they glorify God. And they say, a great prophet has arisen among us, and God has visited his people. And then right after that, John the Baptist sends some of his followers and says, hey, are you the guy that's to come? Are you the one who's coming? And Jesus responds by saying, hey, look what's happening. Go and tell John what you've seen and heard. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news preached to them. Then later in that chapter, after this woman comes into Simon the Pharisee's house that Jesus was a guest in, but not treated as a special guest in, she comes and cries on his feet, wipes the tears with her hair, and then worships him with this ointment. And Simon the Pharisee thinks to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know the sort of woman that is touching him, for she's a sinner. Jesus obviously definitely knew because he could read his thoughts and responds to Simon's thoughts. Pretty crazy there. Later on, after he forgives her sins, all the people at the table say, who is this who even forgives sins? And then in chapter 8, his disciples are caught in a storm, and Jesus is asleep in the boat. They have to shake him awake, and he wakes up and he rebukes the wind and the waves, and everything's still. And his disciples were afraid, and they marveled, and they said, who is this man that he commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him? See, this theme of his identity is coming up all throughout this whole section of Luke that we've been studying, and really, it kind of comes to fruition here in chapter 9, and several different things that happen in chapter 9. It kind of starts right here in our passage this morning. We're going to be in chapter 9, Luke chapter 9, starting in verse 18, if you want to read with me. Once, when Jesus was praying in private and his disciples were with him, he asked them, who do the crowd say that I am? And they replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others that one of the prophets of long ago has come back to life. This is a pretty simple question if you think about it. Hey, what's going on out there? What's the feel of the crowd? What's happening? What's the feeling out there? What's going on? What's the scuttlebutt, right? And it's interesting if you think about it. I don't think I thought about this aspect of it. It was why did Jesus ask the question in the first place? Jesus was, believe it or not, he was present whenever all those people said all those things about him that we just read through, right? He knew everything that the crowd was already saying about him. He doesn't need to ask this question, right? Beyond that, he knows everything. He's God, right? So he doesn't need to ask this question. So what's the purpose? Why does he do this? Maybe it's to set up this next question that he's about to ask. Maybe it's he just wanted to see if his disciples were paying attention, because a lot of times they missed a lot of really obvious things that were going on around them. Maybe, I don't know, maybe Jesus wanted to see if his disciples would be honest with him about what people were actually saying about him. Even the negative stuff. Maybe he just wanted to see, are they really going to be truthful with me about what's going on? I don't know what his purpose, maybe we'll see what his purpose was by the end of this, but what we see, what the disciples say is that the crowd was wrong about what they thought about Jesus. They were wrong, right? They try to say that he's one of the prophets from long ago, right? He's John the Baptist, which doesn't make any sense because John the Baptist is still alive that we know of. He's working at the same time. Obviously, this guy's not too different, the same guy as the other guy, right? Obviously, that's not true. But then they thought maybe Elijah, the prophet, their known prophet, who was taken up, right? Maybe that's what they think. Maybe one of the other prophets, they were guessing that this was one who was sent from God. What they're missing is what Luke's birth narrative tries to make as clear as day, is that he's not just one sent from God, he is God. He is Emmanuel, what we've been celebrating the last several weeks. He was God with us, not merely someone sent from God. They were wrong. They weren't seeing the full picture. This is obvious that this is the case with the crowds. But I don't think, honestly, with our text, I don't think Jesus is concerned at all with what the crowds think about him. I don't think he was really concerned at all with what they're saying about him. I think he had something else in mind. Let's keep reading. This is what he says in chapter 9, verse 20. But what about you? He asked. Who do you say that I am? And Peter answered, God's Messiah. Jesus strictly warned them not to tell this to anyone. Jesus asked a question. I think it's the most important question anybody can answer. Every single person in this room, every single person outside of this room, I think that's the most important question we could answer. Who is Jesus? One author said the question, who is Jesus, is the single most important question one will ever answer. There it is, right? Like, I really think it's true. Our lives are built on the foundation of who Jesus is. If our lives are built on the foundation with him as the cornerstone, we have hope. Right? We have truth to cling to. We have new identity, a new purpose. This is truly the most important question that anybody could ever answer. Maybe this morning, that's where we need to stop. Maybe that's where you need to just be honest with yourself and answer this question, maybe for the first time. You just need to say, who is Jesus? Like, who is he? Maybe you need to do that. One of my favorite things as a pastor, getting to do this full time, is the conversations I have with people when they're thinking about baptism. That's one of my favorite things to do. Because I think it's the most important decision you could ever make in your entire life. More important than any, far outweighs any other decision. I fully believe that. I'm assured of that. But I love seeing it click with people. And I love talking about, every time we take somebody's confession of faith before they're baptized, the questions we ask them is, do you believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God? Do you believe that's who he is? And then we say, do you accept him as your Lord and as your Savior, right? And I always say to students whenever I'm having this conversation, I always say the Savior's the easy part, right? He did that for you 2,000 years ago. The Lord is the part that starts today and goes every day from today. You say, he's the boss of my life. He's my ruler. He's the one who calls the shots now. I love having these conversations. And really, honestly, though, if I'm being really honest with you, I think sometimes we can answer those questions without thinking enough. I think sometimes we can answer those questions and we don't spend as much time contemplating them and their weight as much as we should. Because these questions and our answers to them have some weight to them, for sure. Literally, ultimately, the way that we answer these questions will shape our lives. Is Jesus really the Messiah? Is he really the Son of God? Is he really alive today? Does he really have all authority in heaven and on earth? Is he really your Lord and Savior? These are really huge questions that have huge implications. One author said it this way: your view of God will determine everything else. Your view of God will determine everything else. I think that's true. So the question, who is Jesus, is the single most important question that anyone could ever answer. Enter Peter. It's pretty obvious. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer to think of any of the disciples who would speak up in this moment when Jesus says, "Who do you say that I am?" It would be Peter, right? It would make sense. If you read the Gospels, you read the book of Acts, it makes sense that it's Peter who stands up and says something, right? This is who he was. He was bold. He was courageous. He was outspoken at times, and he was completely wrong in others, right? He's the first person who's called a disciple by Jesus. He's the first disciple here to ever confess Jesus as the Messiah, to ever put that title on him. And he's the only one who stepped out of the boat, right? And he's the one who stood up to preach the first sermon of the early church after Jesus was crucified. And Peter's response is pretty simple, right? He says, "You are God's Messiah." Other translations say you are the Messiah sent from God. You're the Christ of God. Matthew adds in the Son of the living God. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God, right? God's people believed in the prophecies of the Old Testament, that there was a promised rescuer coming, someone who was going to come and deliver them, someone who was coming to redeem them. A Messiah was coming. Now, there's a couple things that we need to clarify here. Messiah and Christ are basically the same thing. Okay? Christ is the Greek translation of the Hebrew word Messiah. They both mean the same thing, right? Christ is not Jesus' last name. Okay? That's not his last name. He's Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus Christ. Christ is not his last name. Christ is a title that's given to him. He's the anointed one. That's what it means. He's the anointed one, right? This is what it is. It's pretty close to the term king. The Messiah comes to make things right again, right? He's coming to reestablish the kingdom of God here on earth, a kingdom of power, both physically and politically. That's what he was coming to do. At least that's what they thought, right? Peter is pretty confident with his answer, and rightfully so, right? This is a pretty stinking good answer. But as we keep reading our text, we can see that Peter doesn't fully understand what he says. Let's keep reading. Luke chapter 9, verse 22. Jesus said, "The Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and he must be killed on the third day be raised to life." You see what Jesus does here? What Jesus doesn't do here is he doesn't say, "No, Peter, you're wrong." He doesn't call him out and say, "No, you're wrong." But Jesus accepts Peter's confession, "Yes, I am God's Messiah, but let me go ahead and tell you what really I mean by that. Let me redefine what Messiah means." That's what Jesus is doing here. Like he's going against the grain of what's happening. And talk about a jam-packed verse right here, verse 22. This is crazy. Jesus starts off by saying that he's the Son of Man. He calls himself the Son of Man. We know in Luke's gospel that there's a ton of different times that Luke loves to put Jesus' divinity, his godship, right up next to his humanity. He likes to put them right next to each other to show that he is fully God, he is fully man at the same time, right? He loves to do that. Right? But this isn't just him calling himself the Son of Man isn't just saying, "Hey, I'm human." What he's actually referring to, what he's referencing is Daniel chapter 7, which is a messianic prophecy in the Old Testament, and this is what it says. "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man. Coming with the clouds of heaven, he approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence, and he was given," listen to this, "authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshiped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed." Now, if you know this reference, like the disciples would have known that reference, and you know Jesus says the Son of Man right there, then you would think, hey, Peter's pretty spot on, right? His thought of what the Messiah is coming to do, coming to take over, establish his kingdom in power and physically and politically, like this makes sense. Peter's pretty spot on. But Jesus introduces right after that a condition that comes with him being the Son of Man, with him being the real Messiah. There's a condition, and it's one word in this verse, the most important word in this verse, must. He says, the Son of Man must suffer many things. He must be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and he must be killed, and he must be raised again on the third day. Timothy Keller says that until Jesus says this, no one would have connected the Messiah, the promise of the Messiah, with the text of the suffering servant in Isaiah 43, 53, and 54. Right? That we know those passages pretty well, that he was pierced for our transgressions, by his wounds we are healed. That passage, like there was no such idea of the Messiah who's to come, who's going to suffer. That's not what's happening here. That's not how things are supposed to go. This is going so much against the grain of what the people would have thought was to happen with the Messiah. This is completely against what they're doing here. And honestly, Peter is mad whenever Jesus says this. Luke's gospel doesn't record it. I think it's interesting that Luke's gospel doesn't record it because Luke's primary guy that he's getting all of this information to write the gospel of Luke is a guy named Peter. the guy who gets really mad after this. Maybe he's just trying to make himself look good. I don't know. That's an assumption, okay? Don't read into that, okay? But what I'm saying is, like Peter in Mark's gospel, whenever this is recorded, and in Matthew's gospel, Peter is mad, and he rebukes Jesus. He takes him to the side, and it says he rebukes him. That word for rebuke is actually the same word that Jesus uses to call demons out of demon-possessed people throughout the Gospels. This is a harsh word that Peter's using here. He rebukes Jesus and says, this isn't what's going to happen. I'm not going to let this happen. This isn't how things are supposed to go. And you guys know what happens, right? You know what Jesus says. Jesus looks at Peter right after he's just made this incredible confession. You're the Christ. You're the Messiah. And he says, get behind me, Satan. You do not have in mind the things of God, but only the things of man. There's a quote from Timothy Keller, and this is what he says when he's talking about this verse. I think it's going to be up here. Peter is furious after hearing this. Why? Because he has an agenda. And his agenda led from strength to strength, and it didn't include suffering. When he sees that Jesus is not working from his agenda, he rebukes him. Listen to this last part. If your agenda is the end, then Jesus is just the means, and you're using him. Now, that was pretty convicting for me the first time I read it. If your agenda is the end, then Jesus is just the means, and you're using him. Here's the deal. I think sometimes we can do what Peter does when we come to Jesus. I think sometimes we can come and we can bring our own agenda into it. We come to Jesus with expectations of how he's supposed to work, what he's supposed to do, the kind of God he's supposed to be. We want Jesus to provide for us and to deliver us and to redeem us, but we want it on our own terms. We want Jesus, and let's be a little bit more specific. We want Jesus to save us by keeping us physically healthy. That's probably a pretty normal prayer, right? And we want Jesus to keep us healthy. I mean, especially right now, there's a stinking pandemic happening, right? Especially right now, keep us healthy, right? That's a pretty common prayer, and that's not a bad prayer. And God is concerned about your physical health. That's not what I'm saying here. But perfect health or safety from a global pandemic is not a promise that we have from God. That's not something that Jesus assures us of. I mean, sometimes maybe we want Jesus to save us by keeping a roof over our heads or food on the table, by providing for us monetarily. But Jesus said that he himself didn't have a place to lay his head. That's the Savior we follow. That's the Messiah we follow. Maybe, we want Jesus to save us by making us successful. But Jesus actually says, in this world, you will have trouble, is what he says. Here's the deal. These and many others, we could go on with this list of different things that we kind of bring to Jesus or we bring to God with expectation of how we want him to work in our lives. None of these things are bad in and of themselves. But if that's the reason why you're coming to Jesus, is so you can get A, B, or C, then it's idolatry. If you're coming to Jesus to get something other than Jesus, it's idolatry. That's what it is, plain and simple. That's what we're talking about here. We want Jesus to be the Messiah, but on our terms. We want him to save us, provide for us, deliver us, redeem us in the way that we think is best. But that's not how our relationship with God works. We don't get to define who he is or what he gets to do. We worship him for who he is and what he has already done. Sometimes we can take this passage, a lot of times, and it's not a bad thing to do necessarily with this passage, okay, because it's an important thing to do. But sometimes we take this and we say, and the driving force is, ask yourself, who is Jesus to you, right? And that's not a bad question. There's nothing wrong with that question, right? Who is Jesus to you? Because ultimately, you need to answer that for yourself. Is he really the Lord and Savior of my life, right? But I think we're missing the point a little bit if we make it about us, right? I think the better question is just to leave it at who is Jesus? What is the truth about Jesus? And then you respond to it. What's the truth about who he is? And you respond to it. Somebody said this: religious people find God useful. but growing Christians find God beautiful. And we don't just go to him to see what he can do for us. We go to him and we worship him because of how incredible he is. Like, that's what we're supposed to come do. Can I give you, here's what I want to do. I want to give you a New Year's resolution. New year, new start, 2021. I want to give you a New Year's resolution. Here it is. Let God define who God is. And you just put him in his rightful place. Let God define who God is. You put him in his rightful place. And as I'm reading this passage, I couldn't help but think about Peter. I resonate with Peter in a lot of ways, not really as good ways, mainly his negative attributes, like the outspoken, the obnoxious, the foot in mouth attributes, like those ones. Those are the ones that I tend to resonate with more so with Peter. But I couldn't help but think about, honestly, what Peter would have been thinking on Saturday. Saturday after Jesus has been crucified and he's buried. It's silence. There's a lot of time of reflection, a lot of quiet time on Saturday. And I imagine that Peter, like, of all the things he remembered through Jesus' life, I think this one might have stuck out in his brain a little bit. I think this interaction might have been like, man, I think he might have been thinking about it. I think as he reflected, as he remembered, as Jesus is being beaten, as he's being flogged by the Roman officers, I think Peter would have heard the words of Jesus echo in his mind. The Son of Man must suffer many things. I think as he remembers the assembly of the elders condemning Jesus and taking him before Pilate, and Pilate washing his hands and condemning him to crucifixion, I think Peter might have heard the words of Jesus echoing in his mind. The Son of Man, he must be killed, must be rejected. I think as he's hanging on the cross, as Peter remembers that day before, Jesus is gasping for breath. And he says, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. I can imagine Peter hearing the words of Jesus echo in his mind. The Son of Man must be killed. But then can you imagine, like the next morning, Sunday morning, can you imagine it? Like he's gathered with his friends and they're all downcast. It's like a carryover from Saturday, right? Like they're all like, what in the world are we going to do now? And the door busts open. And these women run in. And they're like, guys, you won't believe it. I'm telling you, Jesus is alive. We just came from the tomb. This is crazy. He's risen. There were some men who appeared to us and told us they look like angels. We don't really know, but like he's alive. Seriously, you got to believe us. And the guys are like, they don't know what they're talking about. Kidding me? But Peter, Luke's gospel says that Peter stands up and he busts out the door the other way, going back where they just came from. And he runs, and he doesn't stop. And he gets all the way to the tomb, and it says he stoops down. I think maybe he's holding onto his knees, trying to catch his breath. Maybe that's what it is. He gets to the tomb, and he's like, and then he looks up, and all he sees, as he looks into the tomb, all he sees is just the linen cloth. That's all he sees right there. It says, in Luke's gospel, it says that as he's on his way home, he's just marveling at what had happened. I can only imagine that in this moment, that Peter can hear the words of Jesus echoing in his mind. The Son of Man must be raised to life on the third day. In the rest of Luke's gospel and rest of Luke's writing, Peter doesn't ever say Messiah, doesn't ever call Jesus the Messiah again. Except for one time. The next time that he calls him the Messiah, it's the day of Pentecost. It's Acts chapter 2. You know it pretty well. Peter stands up, and he's like, these guys aren't drunk. What's happening right now is the Holy Spirit is coming upon them. This is the promise from the Old Testament that the Holy Spirit is coming upon them to empower them to do more than we could ever imagine. Preaches this incredible sermon. Talks about how Jesus has been exalted, that he really is the Messiah, and he ends it with this, Acts chapter 2, verse 36. Let all of Israel be assured of this. God has made this Jesus, whom you crucified, both Lord and Messiah. You know what happens after that, right? 3,000 people are baptized because of that. Because Peter let Jesus define who he was, and he just put him in his rightful place. The result was Jesus was glorified. People came to know him. I wonder if Peter's understanding of the Messiah was just a little bit better the day of Pentecost than it was that day whenever he said, Jesus is the Messiah. You know why I think Jesus asked the question? I asked that question at the beginning. Why did Jesus even ask this question? Like, why did he even bother saying, who do the crowd say that I am? Who do you say that I am? I think ultimately Jesus was trying to give us a lesson of his identity. He's trying to set the record straight once and for all. Yeah, I am the Messiah. And this is what that means. I have to suffer. I have to be rejected. I have to be killed, but I have to be raised. Let God define who God is. You put him in his rightful place. What's his rightful place? Man, his rightful place is at the center of your attention. His rightful place is at the center of your home. His rightful place is at the center of your life. It's on the throne, forever glorified, forever exalted, forever worshiped. Let's not put him in the place that we think is best, because we don't know what's best. Let's put him in the place that he deserves. We're going to worship him this morning. We're going to sing out this song of what he's done, who he is. And let's not hold back. Man, let's worship him for who he is. Let's start off the year right. Let's give him what he deserves this morning. Amen, church? Let's do it together. Let's stand and let's sing.